Welcome back to this Blender 2.8 Beginners Compositing course. For this video, we're going to be picking up where we left off in episode 4, and we're going to be using some of the nodes that we have learned up to this point to create this effect for our image. In particular, we're going to be focused on blurring and using the glare node to create this brightening of the center of the image. But that's not all that we're going to be doing. In this lecture, the main focus is going to be on how you can create masks and use those masks in compositing to isolate specific parts of your image. Now, if you want to follow along with this 6-part series using your own projects, you are more than welcome to do so. However, if you are looking to use the project that we are using for this series, then you can download it via the link in the video description. But not only will you be getting all of the assets related to our project, if you sign up, you will also get access to our free Blender 2.8 PDF cheat sheet full of keyboard shortcuts that are commonly used in Blender for things like navigating the 3D viewport, creating animations, manipulating nodes in the compositor, etc., as well as some of our top tips and tricks for making the most of your Blender experience and improving your workflow. On top of that, you will also have access to our bi-weekly newsletter for the latest information on all things related to Blender. The first thing I want to do for this video is bring back our title image. That means we're going to go Shift and A, go to Input, add a new image, position here, and this time if we just zoom in on our image node, we don't have to press the Open Image option because we already have our title image in this project. Instead, we can go to this drop down menu and then we can find our title image, left click, and that brings our image into this node. Up next, we need to add this image node to our tree. I'm just going to, just for the moment, get rid of the glare node itself, and instead I'm going to add in a different node. So go Shift S, and this time I'm actually going to use a Mix RGB node. Select Mix. Then we're going to take the image output and plug it into the image input, and you can see that one image basically overlaps the other, but we can solve this problem very easily by taking the alpha value from our title image and plugging it into the factor value of our Mix RGB node. Let that composite, and we end up with a transparent title image on top of our main image. If we were to reverse the positioning of the two images, which means grabbing one input and basically swapping it with the other, the title image becomes the primary image when it comes to the data that this Mix RGB node is receiving. However, we can actually see the main image or parts of the main image within the words of our title. For now though, I'm going to reverse these back into their original positions to give us our image with the title in front. Next, I'm going to just zoom out of my background, which I can do by pressing Phi on my keyboard. So I'm going to press Phi a couple of times just to zoom out. And what I want to do to start with is I want to decrease the brightness of the main image. which means we're going to need to bring back one of our color nodes. Now, many of the color nodes will be able to work for us in this situation, but I think the one that I am going to use is going to be a hue saturation value. I'm going to plug this in here because I don't want it to affect the title image. Remember, where you plug nodes in to your node tree can have a significant impact on their effects on the final result. Now I'm going to place my hue saturation value node here, so left click to add it to our setup. Then let's try reducing the value here. So if we reduce that to, say, let's go around 0.65, that begins to lower the brightness value. I think we can go even lower than that, so maybe let's go 0.37. And I believe that's dark enough for the effect that I'm going to be looking for. Now, using something like the glare node to create a glare around the words is going to be pretty difficult in this situation, and the reason why is the title image is effectively just text created in Photoshop on a transparent background. If I demonstrate the glare node with our title image, we're going to go Filter, Glare, and we're going to plug the glare into here. Now, currently the threshold is set to 1, so there is nothing there as we expect. If I set the threshold down all the way to 0, let that composite, it does work, but the effect is very strange. It's almost taking out the saturation from the corners of some of these letters. If we test the mix value here, so increase that to 1, we can see that the behavior is not what it was before when we previously used the glare node on our main image. This means we're going to need to find a different solution. And the solution that I am going to use is by creating a mask that's going to go around our title image. This means that currently we don't need the glare node because it doesn't serve us any purpose. So make sure that the glare node is selected, press X, and then relink the image output with the image input. And now we are going to be creating the mask. Now, in order to create the mask, we're not going to do that in the compositor. Instead, we're actually going to do that here in the image editor. What we're going to do is we're going to change this option here from view, which allows us to view the image, to mask, which allows us to create a mask over our existing image. I'm going to left click. This is an example of a mask that I previously created before beginning the tutorial series, which means I'm going to need to first of all delete this mask. If I come up to the header bar for this panel and scroll down on my mouse, I can pan my options across until I see the name of my mask. In this case, the name of my mask is whiteboard. I'm just going to click on this X button here, and that is going to temporarily get rid of my mask that I created. Now, to add a new mask, we can click on this new button, and that's going to allow us to create this new mask. And we've got an operator panel that we can open up, but we only have the one option here, which is to name our mask, which means I need to name it something that's going to be appropriate. So I'm going to name it as Title Glare. And press enter. And that's the name of our new mask. Now, we haven't created the mask yet. To do that, I'm going to go to the add menu, and I can select either circle or square. Now you can also create the points of your mask manually, but I don't need to do that if I'm going to create a uniform shape around my title image, which is what I'm planning to do, which means we're just going to be keeping things simple when it comes to creating the mask. Let's go with the square option, and when we add the square, it currently has a set size, which at the moment is 100 pixels, and a set location. So we need to first of all define the size and then define the location. At the moment you might not be able to see it, but it is just behind the operator panel in the corner of our image, with the values of X and Y both set to 0. That means that the center of our square is set to those points on the image itself. If I was to increase the value on the X axis, and I'm going to need to increase it quite a lot, for example 500, and press enter, eventually you'll start to see it's still behind our operator panel. Let's increase that even further to 1500. And you can see it right there. So it's moved 1500 pixels across the image. But we want it to be positioned probably about here, which means I'm going to take it on the y-axis about halfway up. Now this is a 1920 by 1080 image. Let's try a value of 540 on the y-axis, which looks pretty much spot on for this situation. Then we'll take the X value and reduce it to maybe 600. That looks perfect. Now we can begin to look at the size of our square, which we're going to make a little bit bigger than what it is. Let's try a value of 150. Maybe a little bit more than that. Let's try 180. And let's move it up a little bit on the y-axis. Maybe a value of 570. Oh, that's too much. At this point, the values get a little bit closer. Okay, so here we've got a square that's in the correct positioning, but we want it to go all the way across our title image. Now you will notice that my operator panel just disappeared, and that's because I ended up pressing the A button to select all of the points on my square. But that's fine because we don't need that operator panel anyway. What we do need is we need to grab these 2 points, which we can do so by holding down the Shift key, and then hit the G key on our keyboard, and this allows us to grab these 2 points and move them across. We can also lock them to a specific axis, so we can lock them to either the X or Y axes. In this case, I am going to lock it to the X axis, move it all the way across, and then left click to confirm. Now we get our move operator panel that has appeared. I'm just going to minimize that. And I think it could actually be brought up a little bit and also brought down a little bit as well. I'm going to select the top 2 points, hit G, then Y, then just move it up ever so slightly to about here. Select the bottom points, hit G, then Y, and move down to about here. We no longer need to do anything with regards to the creation of the mask. Everything's ready to go in that case. Now it's time to add the mask to our node setup. I'm just going to zoom out here just a bit and go Shift A, and we're going to be adding a new input, which is going to be a mask. I'm going to position this node here, and if we just zoom in on the node itself, we have this icon here which can browse the masks that we have created. You will see that I have 3. If you're following along with the lecture, you will most probably have the 1, which is going to be title glare, which is the one we want to select. Now we have selected our title glare as the mask, but how are we going to add it to our... Now the method that I am going to use for bringing in our title glare mask is to actually select the Mix RGB node, hit Shift D to duplicate it, and position the duplicate here. Then I'm going to change the type of operation from mix to overlay. So select overlay from this list. Then we're going to take our mask and plug it into the factor value here. And now we can see both the main image as well as the mask. If we were to change this image color, however, so let's go something like red, then as it is, it's just going to give our mask a paint over based on what color we select. What we want to do here is just get that back to pure white. Let that load up again. And we want to plug something into this image node. If we were to reintroduce our glare node, position it about here, then connect our input to the inputs here. Nothing changes right off the bat, but we already know that's because of the threshold value for the glare, which is set to 1 by default. Let's set that value to 0.2. Let that composite. And we still don't get anything. The reason why is because we need to tell the glare node to use the mask. We can do that by taking the mask output and plugging it into the image input. As soon as we do that, we let it composite and then we get the glare effect. At the moment, the glare looks a little bit bland, and the 2 reasons why is the glare is mainly equally distributed across the mask, and also I think the square border is a bit too harsh. The first thing I'm going to do in that case is deal with the distribution of the glare by changing the type of glare. I think I'm going to go and just check each of these. So we're on streaks at the moment. Let's select ghosts, preview that. That instantly looks better. We can see that there's a little bit more light in the center of the mask and it fades away as you move out towards the edges. We have fog glow and we have simple star. Now of these 4 options, simple star gives us a little bit more brightness in this case, but I'm going to go with the ghosts effect. I think that's going to look quite suitable, because what I'm going to do next is I am going to add some blur to go around our mask. That means I'm going to need to reposition a couple of nodes. I am going to go Shift A, filter, And which one can we use? Let's just use the normal blur, see how that works to start with. Plug that in here. And then use an X and Y value in the 20s, see how that works. Allow that to composite. And it's looking a little bit better. I think maybe let's try a different type of blur. Maybe we can go Shift S, try bilateral blur instead. See how that looks when we load it up. Maybe change the color spacing. Try reducing that, see if that helps. Perhaps even the color sigma. And try increasing the iterations. It gets to a point where it's basically trial and error to try and get the effect that you are looking for. I'm just looking for a little bit of a feather around the edges of the mask here. And I think the number of iterations is helping to improve that feather just bit by bit. So increasing it to 10. Yeah, we can just begin to see around the edges. The fall off just getting a little bit more noticeable. So I like the look of that glare effect on my image. What we're going to do now is we're going to get a little bit of practice in and create a second mask. But this time we're going to actually create the points for our mask. You will have noticed when I first created, or before I created the mask, that I had already created one previously for the whiteboard. That's what we're going to do now. So zoom in on your whiteboard in the image editor, and in order to create a point for your new mask, you are going to hold Control and then left click. Now, before you do that, the question is, do you want a separate mask or do you want to use your existing mask? If you use your existing mask, you are basically just going to be adding the area of influence that the mask has on your image. Now, I am actually going to add a new mask because I don't want glare on the whiteboard. Instead, what I am aiming to do is I'm basically going to clear the board. So I'm going to make it a single color, which, if we have been following along up to this point, should be a relatively simple task. Now, before we can do that, we need to make sure that we create a new mask, which we can do by going to add, and it's not there. We can only add to our existing mask. So how are we going to add a new one? Well, if you go back to the title glare and then press on the X button here to unlink the data block, you unlink the data block. However, you can still see the effects of our mask because the mask itself still exists in our project and it's still attached to the title glare node here. So that's not really a problem. And now we can just click on this new button to create a new mask. What I'm going to do is I am going to zoom in once again on our whiteboard here in the background. And now it's going to be a matter of adding some control points. I'm going to hold down Control on my keyboard and left click to create a single point. Then we're going to left click about here, another one down here, and just being careful about where you position. We don't want too much overlap on the dodgeball, so zoom in as far as you feel comfortable with. If you don't hold down the Control key, you can grab these points and begin to reposition them. I'm just going to position these appropriately and then back down with Control. We'll have this one down here and reposition. And depending on what you want to do, you will have to spend a little bit more time on constructing masks with custom shapes. I'm going to add another point about here. And it looks like something weird has happened. I'm just going to hit Control and Z. And that's actually because we had a different point selected. We want to select this one at the end, hit Control, and then click. And let's just pan our view. Select this point, hold Shift and select this point, and then to connect them, we're going to use the hotkey Alt and C on our keyboard, and that is going to connect the loop. Now we're just going to make a final readjustment here and also here. And we're getting to the point where we're zooming in so far that you can actually begin to see the pixels of our rendered image. But now I think that mask is suitable for usage. So I am going to name this mask as whiteboard and press enter. Next, we're going to zoom out in our compositor. We're going to hit Shift D to duplicate our overlay node, position here, and at the moment this overlay node is overlaying this white image color on our entire image, which means we now need to take this mask node, hit Shift D to duplicate, position here, and if we zoom in, we can change this from title glare to whiteboard. Now I actually have two masks of the same name. This is an issue that I've left myself with. I've got to make sure that I pick the right one. I'm going to select the first one and plug it in to the overlay here. And in my case, that was the incorrect one, but that's not a problem. I can just select the second one, let that recomposite. We might need to replug that in. And there we go, so that looks a lot better. We do need to plug the mask value into the factor. And because I'm looking for a white background here, I can actually detach from this node and release. And if we have a look to see how that affects our mask, it doesn't appear to have any impact at the moment. Let's try changing this to mix. Let that load up. And there we go. So now, by reverting this back to the mix type, we are able to effectively create a pure white background for our whiteboard, or indeed any other color that we want. So we can choose a red color, for example, let that composite, and then the whiteboard now has a red background. I'm going to set it back to white, and the only thing that I'm going to change with our whiteboard is the level of brightness. So we're going to take the brightness and we're just going to make it a bit grey, a bit dirty, to better suit the rest of our scene. So there we go, we've now been able to add two masks to our node tree. The last thing we're going to do is we're just going to clear things up a bit by adding some frames. So with this node set up, we need to identify basically the hierarchy, which we're going to use the mix RGB nodes to help us with. So anything that comes before this mix RGB node is going to be a part of one frame. Anything that comes before our overlay node here is going to be one frame, and anything that's a part of this mix RGB is going to be a part of one frame. That means I'm going to first of all take these 4 nodes in our scene and hit Shift and P on my keyboard to create a new frame that is going to contain those 4 nodes. With the frame selected, I'm going to give this one a goldish colour and give it the label as title, since it focuses on the title itself. Just move this over here a bit. And next we're going to create a frame for these 4 nodes. So make sure that we select these 4 nodes, hit Shift P to create the frame. This one we're going to give it a very light blue. And the nodes here basically represent the title mask. So we're going to label this frame as title mask. And then finally we have 2 more nodes to finish. We'll move our viewer node over here, take the mix and the whiteboard here, select those 2, hit Shift and P, and name this one as whiteboard mask. Change the colour to, let's go with a pinkish colour this time. Zoom out, and then we're going to enable snapping, and then just readjust if we can. Let's readjust on the Y axis. You can see it gets very finicky when we are dealing with the frames, so let's use our nodes to help us. And just reposition these accordingly. Bring that to about there, that looks a bit better. And then take the mix RGB, and we just want to try and line up the tops of the frames as best we can. We'll take this one here. And there we go. So congratulations guys on completing this video, and stay tuned because one more video in the YouTube compositing course for Blender version 2.8 is still to come. Thanks guys, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching guys. If you are interested in learning more about Blender, then feel free to subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter, which gives you updates on all things Blender, including future releases of Blender, tips and tricks on how to use some of your favourite tools, recommendations for things like tutorials, courses, as well as things like add-ons or websites that can improve your Blender experience. So thanks guys, and I hope to see you in the next video.